What's up, you guys? It's the movie retrospective, going back to the 70s and talking about some Hammer horror.
Yeah.
Although, this one is, even among, like, horror Hammer aficionados, is kind of seen as one of the lesser entries into the series. This is, because this came along, this is Dracula AD 1972. By the time this movie came out, Hammer was kind of... They're back now, but, they were kind of in a downward spiral a little bit. I think, actually, they closed the studio up, just a couple years after this came out. So, I'm not blaming this movie on that entirely. I'm just saying that it was just kind of like...
It's not bad. It's not a bad movie.
It's not.
It's just not in classic Hammer style, with Victorian outfits and medieval type outfits, and castles and shit. It's not like that. It was contemporary for the time. It's happening in 1972. And it tries to go real contemporary. They got wah 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 music in there, and
it sounds
bell
like
bottoms.
Sounds like blaxploitation movie a little bit.
Yeah, and
which is a little bit jarring.
Sex and drugs and everything. But and Dracula's in the mix. And it's kind of like a police procedural too. And then you got Peter Cushing in there as like fucking Van Helsing's descendant. It's not a bad movie.
It's not.
It's pretty good. The only thing I can knock it for is there's not enough Dracula in it. If you got Dracula, you better give him a lot of lines. He better be a damn character. In this one, he's more kind of like a monster that shows up at the end. That's the only thing I didn't like about it. He's
not in it much. I think a lot of people... there's a lot of things that people don't like about this particular movie, but I think one of the things that they don't like is, you've got Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, and they're underutilized, I feel like. Like, Peter Cushing has, a bigger part than Christopher Lee does. Yeah. But Christopher Lee is hardly in it. Yeah. And it's even when he is there, it's he's not really given a great deal to do.
No.
You would kind of think that if they were calling it Dracula AD 1972, you would get some, interaction between Dracula and the modern era. Yeah. But you don't really have that.
No.
They don't really do that.
And, Blackula and Scream, Blackula Scream did a good job of vampires in the 1970s. And, fucking Mama Waldy, who was Blackula, fucking Mama Waldy had a lot of shit to do and a lot of lines. So you got to know that character role. I would like to see, because Christopher Lee he's a good Dracula.
Yeah, he's a kick-ass Dracula. I always like him as Dracula.
He's a good Dracula. It's not Bela, but it is just a different interpret. He's the English Dracula, okay? He's physically imposing. It sounds and looks like he's fucking in charge, all right? You don't want to mess with this dude. So let's have him stunting. Let's have him bragging about his heritage and how he's commanded nations. You know what I mean? Who are you to even threaten me, Van Helsing? I have commanded nations for centuries, Yeah, okay, let's hear more about that, man. He doesn't give not enough lines.
He's really not. And the thing about it, poor Christopher Lee at this point. This was the 7th movie, I think, that he played Dracula in. And he would only do one more because he was, kind of sick of it at this point. The one after this one, which is also pretty reviled by audiences, which is called The Satanic Rites of Dracula. That was the last time that he would play Dracula because he didn't really like the idea of bringing Dracula up to the modern era. He more liked him in his own time period, when it was Edwardian or Victorian or whatever, and he's and he just thought it was a dumb idea, bringing it up to the modern era. But the thing about it, though, like I said, Hammer at this point were, they weren't doing so well, and they were thinking, well, maybe everybody's getting sick of these kind of just gothic melodramas, the old school monsters, so they saw the success of stuff like Count Yorga, which was, I think that was American International Pictures, AIP, and how it wasn't about Dracula, but it was a vampire in the modern era. And they're like, okay, well, maybe we need, the youths, to come see this stuff, and so they're trying to, revamp it. So they just thought, oh, we'll bring Dracula up to the modern era. But Christopher Lee was not a fan of that idea. So, he agreed to do it, but I don't think he liked it all that much. He didn't phone it in or anything, but he's not really in it all that much.
Yeah, he probably told him to look, I'll be in the movie, but I don't want to be in it very much. Maybe
he was in the next one too, but that was the last one. What's crazy about this to me is that, because everybody always makes a big deal. Well, it's always a good time, when you have Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in the same movie. And the thing about it, though, that I didn't even realize, because I guess I had thought, because they were in a lot of movies together, but I thought they were in more Dracula movies together. They said this was actually the first time that they'd been like Dracula Van Helsing since 1958, like the first Dracula movie, which is just called Dracula in the UK, but it's called Horror of Dracula in the US. So I was like, that blew my mind. Like, Christopher Lee played Dracula, like, you know, in movies subsequently, but I guess he wasn't in them like when Peter Cushing played Van Helsing. I just kind of thought, so this was kind of like a big deal because it was the first time that had happened since 1958, but then, you know, it didn't really do all that well.
Well, it's just not fleshed out enough from the vampire angle. It's more like a police procedural. If you like police movies, you'd like this one because they spend most of their time hunting down what they think is a cult of satanic cult. It is a satanic cult kind of, but they're vampires, vampire thralls basically is doing it, and they're not bad. The actor that played Dracula's main thrall, who was being promised to get turned,
Johnny Alucard.
Yeah, he eventually does get turned. He's a good actor, and me and Jim we're commenting that he's a real good-looking guy. Everybody is good-looking in these Hammer flicks, pretty much. You know, he's a real good-looking guy. He would have made a really good Lestat.
I was thinking that.
Yeah, he made a real good Lestat.
A lot of reviewers pointed out, too, that they probably got him because he gives off a real Malcolm McDowell from A Clockwork Orange energy.
Yeah,
he does kind of look like that as well, and I think that's kind of what they wanted. You know what I mean? Like, they wanted that kind of... Because I think Malcolm McDowell had also been...
more imposing, though, I think. McDowell was kind of wiry and creepy, but it's still kind of magnetic in a certain way. This guy's kind of a little more buffed out.
Yeah.
More leading man, kind of, really. He'd have made a great Lestat.
That's kind of, when I was reading the books, like, in the 80s, that's kind of, like, the look that I was picturing, like, this guy. But, yeah, I think the thing about it is that I think they concentrate too much on the hippies. And the thing about it, too, is that this came out in 1972. I think originally they wanted it to come out in 1969, so it wouldn't have been quite as dated. But the thing about it is that by the time 1972 had come along in London, all of the stuff that they're doing in this movie, like all the hippie stuff, like the music and the clothes they're wearing and stuff, was like several years out of date. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I mean, you could tell that like older dudes like wrote this and were like talking, like, what are the kids into today? And it's like, you know, they were like 5 years out of date.
One of the hippies, though, is wearing a fantastic looking like goth witch kind of outfit and made out of damn black, I guess, beads and strings and shit. Looks really good. And if you look, it's Caroline Munro, the exquisite Caroline Munro.
This was kind of her first big movie, I feel like.
Yeah, and she's the first victim basically offered up to Dracula, and Dracula just eats her and kills her. Doesn't even turn her into a vampire, which is like, wait, hold on. Dracula is supposed to be about the ladies, and he gets the hottest one right off the bat and just kills her.
He didn't want her. He wanted
one of the other ones,
Jessica, because Jessica was Van Helsing, like the current day Van Helsing's granddaughter.
That's not what I'm saying. I know. I'm saying he gets his hands on the hottest one out of the group and just kills her. Doesn't even make her a vampire.
Yeah.
You know.
What a waste of Carolyn.
What a waste of Carolyn Monroe. All right, you know, had they been thinking about it, you know, if this was Bela Lugosi's Dracula, he would have been impressed and added her to the harem. You know, like, we're gonna keep this one, but no, he killed that one.
Well, see, I think they kind of explained, because we're sitting here going, because I was like, okay, now, I know that in the original novel, and I think, like, most of the movies that were, you know, mostly based on the original novel, like, you know, as soon as Dracula drank your blood, like, a few times, and then you died, they all came back as vampires, right? You didn't necessarily need, like, the whole blood exchange situation.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how that was going to go with this, because he kills Caroline Munro's character first, who I think her character name is Laura, actually.
She was partially eaten, too.
Well, see, I think that he didn't do that.
Okay.
I think that Johnny Alucard did that to make it look like a serial killer did it, or some other, like, to kind of cover up the whole fact that it was... Even though he took the last name Alucard, which obviously is Dracula spelled backwards. Yeah. So, well, yeah.
From several movies.
Right. Well, I think this might have been the origin of that, though. Okay. Because I think, like, somebody, like, took off with that idea. but I'm not sure. It could have been done before that, but it's still dumb. So yeah, but they actually kind of, because she doesn't come back, like they just find her body like in the rubble, like by the decommissioned church where they were doing the satanic rite or whatever. And I was like, oh, so she's not going to come back as a vampire then. I was like, so I guess we're all not coming back as vampires. But then I think they later on said that, oh, well, when he first came, when Dracula first got resurrected, he wasn't strong enough to make other vampires.
Yeah.
So he had to like eat a few people. Because remember, he ate the other girl too, like the one that was named Gaynor, I think her name was. Like he ate that girl too, and I don't think she came back as a vampire. But then and he killed somebody off screen that like we didn't know who they were. So I think he killed 3 ladies first, and then he started like making vampires. Like he had just like built up his strength, I guess.
Yeah, had this been Bela's fucking Dracula, or had it been Lestat, he wouldn't have been killing hotties. He would have gone down to the rough parts of fucking town and killed burglars or killed fucking muggers and drug dealers and eaten and drank them. All right, that's what to gain his strength, because Lestat did that all the time.
Yeah, and
he killed a bunch of people. Lestat did, but he tended to value people. He liked evildoers. He liked to kill. He said they tasted better. But I think what it was, I think in Lestat's case, he could just live with it better.
Yeah, that's probably what it was.
I think he was lying to Louis about they tasted better. He just he appreciated beauty, because that was really the only thing they could do. They couldn't do much else other than appreciate beauty. They couldn't have sex.
Yeah.
So but it's not a bad movie. It just fell short of a good vampire story. Because really, man, let's be honest, you're watching a vampire movie because the vampire is the most interesting character in the damn movie. So there's got to be a lot of him. And he has to be telling his story. In the two Blackula movies, you got to hear Momowaldi's story. He even was interested in science and technology, and he was from the past, which makes a lot of sense. That got included in the Lestat, Interview of the Vampire type books too, is that when Lestat ended up in the modern world, because he'd been sleeping for a long time, he was amazed by television and radio and cars. He owned a Harley, and he rode motorcycles and stuff. He did it all at night, but he had toys. And you would think that, a guy like Dracula would have been really impressed with things like television and music and modern culture. And he probably would have liked the club life and going out at night and chasing women. Because it's boring just to hang out in damn castles and kill people, and drink blood. There's got to be more to life than that.
Of the time?
And really, Dracula's a nobleman. He was a warlord and commanded nations, but he's a nobleman. They did that shit so they could enjoy the finer aspects of life. They appreciated art and music and people and clothes and toys, and so he would have had a lot of shit and interest in a lot of stuff. And they should have gotten into that.
That's what I mean.
Where was he living?
Done right.
What was he doing? Yeah.
I think that's kind of what bothered me, because like I said, and Christopher Lee is fantastic as always. Peter Cushing is fantastic as always. Neither of them phone it in, but I do kind of feel like there was a good idea in here that they could have explored, but I think they focused too much on the hippies. Yeah. And like I said, the whole hippie thing, if you don't know like what happens in the movie, it's essentially the same plot as Taste the Blood of Dracula, even though Taste the Blood of Dracula was set like back in the Victorian or Edwardian age, like the other ones. But it's like that, but in the modern day, where it's like a satanic cult or a satanic dude who they kind of imply that he was Dracula's buddy from like back then. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so he had gathered up some of like Dracula's ashes or whatever when Van Helsing killed him 100 years ago, and is like bringing him back into the modern era, like so he can be made into a vampire. So it's like a satanic cult angle. But I kind of feel like they just spend too much time with the hippies, and the hippies are not really all that interesting. That's what I was saying. And like I said, it's just kind of like, and the fact too that it's really kind of like out of date. Like there's a sequence at the beginning where they like crash a party like that has like these kind of, it's like upper class twits, and everyone is like all these old people with, you know, pearls and diamonds on, and they're all like horrified at what these hippies are doing, even though they're not really doing anything all that scandalous.
Making out underneath the tables.
Yeah, and I'm just like,
and playing rock music.
Yeah, it's like, it's so, yeah, and they just, all the old people look aghast, and I'm like, they're not even doing anything. Yeah. It's not like they're fucking, I don't know, they're not doing anything all that day.
I mean, but we're right. I mean, the only thing interesting about a vampire movies really is the vampires, and they should have figured that out a long time ago. And I think some of the B movies in the 50s figured that out. They tried to put as much of the vampire in there as possible. The rest of the people, you see a vampire movie to see the vampires, and Anne Rice got it right. Is where you make the story from the vampire's point of view and the relationships between the vampires and what they're doing, and that's the best way to tell that story. And really, this would have been a good movie had it just been told more from that thrall's point of view. The blonde guy from
Johnny Alucard.
Yeah, from his point of view, and him dealing with Dracula and what Dracula's telling him to do. And then every time he sees Dracula and goes back to Dracula's pad, Dracula's messing with more and more stuff. Like now he's studying nuclear reactors, and he's trying to build an airplane, or he's buying an airplane because he wants to fly. There's a bunch of shit they could have done. Like Dracula would be interested in modern stuff. If he was in the 70s.
Yeah. I'm like, if you're going to bring it up to the modern era, at least put Dracula in that context.
Right.
Because in the movie, Dracula literally, like, they resurrect him in, like, a decommissioned church that's kind of being torn down or whatever. I don't think he ever leaves that. Like, other than to pop around and, like, kill people every now and then. But you don't ever see him, like, out in the streets of London, or you don't ever see him doing, like, modern shit.
It's because they're trying to evoke that damn atmosphere of an old vampire movie where it's Dracula in Castle Dracula or down at Carfax Abbey.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily make a vampire movie, though. A vampire could be, as long as you're telling the story the right way, he could be in any setting.
Yeah, I mean, it worked before, like, it worked when you had them that set, like, in the Victorian or Edwardian era, because that's just kind of like what you did back then.
Yeah.
But like I said, if you're going to update the vampire story to 1972, then put him in 1972. Yeah. Don't just have him stay in the church the whole time.
Mama Waldy was going to, he was down in the hood going to the clubs and shit, listening to funk and disco music.
Right.
And chasing Pam Grier. Wasn't he chasing Pam Grier?
He was, yeah.
Yeah, and, and that worked. And that worked. And they go, say, Jack, you got some fine threads. He's like, well, thank you very much. That's fucking great, you know what I mean? And then he'd hold these conversations with mortals and stuff, and it was, and fucking, what was his name? Marshall? William Marshall?
William Marshall.
Yeah, he carried that role.
Yeah, he killed it.
Yeah, he was great in Star Trek, too, man. The M5 computer. Remember that shit? Yeah.
What a great voice that guy had.
The M5.
But see, that's the thing. Like, Christopher Lee could have totally pulled that off.
Yeah.
Like, I know that he's not a big fan of, like, bringing Dracula up to the modern day, or he wasn't back then. But the thing about the reason everybody likes Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing is because even if maybe the idea of the movie was silly or unbelievable or something like that, they had conviction, you know what I mean? And like them acting the way they acted, like, made you believe it too. Like Peter Cushing, for real, like in this, because I think I even said it when we were watching it. I was just like, man, I'll believe anything Peter Cushing says, just because he takes everything very, very seriously. And honestly, I liked all this stuff too. Like, I liked the police procedural kind of thing with, Peter Cushing, like, interacting with, because they go to Peter Cushing's character because he's a descendant of the original Van Helsing, and he's also an expert on the occult, and they think that there's some kind of, like, satanic angle to these murders, so they go to him for, like, to consult with him or whatever, and he gets to a point where he's pretty sure that, it's an actual vampire that's in, then he has to, like, convince the cops of that. So I didn't even mind any of that. I didn't actually mind the character of Jessica, who was his granddaughter and was one of the friends, like, in the hippie group or whatever. She's actually played by Stephanie Beacham, who was, she was on Dynasty, I think, among many other things. And yeah, she's got some big old bosoms in this as well. Yeah. They show them a lot.
Yeah,
they got like a bunch of shots where she's like kind of like leaning over backwards like that with big old titties and sticking out. It's like it's pretty
Hammer
funny.
knew the formula.
Yeah.
Okay, that was their tradition.
It's pretty boobalicious. This one.
The fucking, hey man, Hammer's got to deliver.
Yeah.
But I really think they should have had a bunch of scenes with Christopher Lee in his new mansion with a wall full of televisions, each one of them on a different channel. He can watch them all at one time using his vampire powers. He's got instead of an organ, he's got a brand new fucking synthesizer that he can fucking do all some, cool music with it. A whole wardrobe of cool 70s clothes that are, kind of like vampiric goth, black velvet looking stuff.
Yeah.
Because they had, some of the thralls were wearing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because Johnny Alucard looked kind of like that. Like,
Yeah.
he looked like he had some crushed velvet kind of, like, situation going on.
Yeah, which was, and Dracula would have been in the height of fashion. He'd be like, okay, what's hip this year? And that's what he would have gone for. It wouldn't have been the 1800s, early 1900s look that Bela had. That was maybe height of fashion back then, but no, fucking Dracula would have been up to date. So he could have gone anywhere. He would have looked like a celebrity. A celebrity pimp, really. That's what he would look like.
Yeah, I definitely think they should have gone. Well, see, the thing about it is that I think at this point, like I said, because Hammer was kind of like on a downward trend at this point and would close like a few years subsequently, I think they were just kind of chasing the tail of the trend. They were like, Count Yorga came out. Actually, Blackula came out the same year as this. But they were kind of like, they saw the writing on the wall. They're like, well, nobody wants to see gothic horror anymore. Nobody wants to see Dracula back in musty old castles anymore. We need to, like, update it like Count Yorga did. And I think that it was just, like, a little too late. And I don't think they cared that much about getting the story, like, really kind of reconciling the character with the modern day. It seems like they didn't really put a great deal of thought into it.
Come to think of it, modernized 1970s vampire pimp, who you're talking about is you're talking about Elvis with his black velvet, fucking. They look like Hammer horror. He evidently liked Hammer horror movies. He liked vampires and stuff. He knew Amela Nurmi, known as Vampira. So, fucking Elvis kind of went goth in the 70s from, black velvet and the high collars and the red shirts, red on black, and then sometimes just white. And that's how Dracula probably would have dressed.
You would think.
He would go, I'm going to go for, cutting edge fashion that kind of harks back to an earlier age. You know what I mean? Fucking, and that's probably way he would have gone. Probably a little top hat or something, fucking, like that's still popular in the goth scene today. Fucking probably platforms. Yeah. I mean, that's men's platforms.
Like I said, it's just kind of a shame because I just kind of feel like it was a little bit. I don't want to go so far as say it was maybe a cash grab, but I don't think they put a great deal of thought into really kind of exploring all the avenues that you could have explored. I mean, basically, it just seemed like there was like Dracula and Peter, Dracula and Van Helsing, their kind of stuff, which honestly didn't even have to be set in the modern era because it was just kind of the same kind of fights that they had like back in the old days, but then like with some hippie stuff tacked on. And the hippie stuff, like I said, wasn't really all that interesting. Like Caroline Munro was good. I liked kind of like the Johnny Alucard thing, although man, Johnny Alucard, he died like a chump, didn't he?
Yeah.
He got killed by a shower.
Yeah, it was that was another underutilized character and not developed well enough for the movie. He should have been a little more sympathetic, I think, and then more interesting once he turned into a vampire. They didn't really make him that interesting. He didn't say what it was like being a vampire.
Yeah, and he died not too long after he got made into a vampire. Because honestly, he just he basically whined his way into being
whined and cried his way into it. And once he got it, you don't hear anything about it. He doesn't come out, oh man, now I can do this, and oh no man, this is what it feels like. Look at what I can do. There's none of that. Which that's what makes a vampire fucking movie.
Yeah,
is to see somebody transform and what can they do now? Because you're kind of when you watch these things, you're kind of living vicariously through the vampire characters. Like, what would I do? What does that feel like? Wish I could do that.
Yeah.
I wish I could hover 2 feet off the ground when you piss me off. I wish I could just look at you and you just freeze you and then just mentally dominate you by staring at you. You know what I mean? Vampires can do that.
Yeah.
Well, let's see that. Let's hear about what that's like. Let's see you try to do it for the first time.
Because you had that character.
You have him, so let's use him.
Who obviously really, really wanted to be a vampire so badly that he went the whole satanic ritual and woke Dracula up from 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and then once he's got this power, you should be able to go on a little journey with him and through growth. You're seeing him grow as a vampire. Maybe you start rooting for him, but then he's killed. See, and that's a lot more of an effective. character, a
yeah,
lot more effective
they maybe could have done that. Like, they could have, like, maybe...
I'd have killed him later in the movie.
Yeah.
Right before Dracula, or have him turned on Dracula for some reason. Something like that. Try to turn on Dracula to gain Dracula's power, but that doesn't work and he's killed.
Yeah,
There's
that's
a bunch of
I like
interesting
that.
ways.
I like that idea.
He's like, fuck you, Dracula. I'm going to take your place. You know what I mean?
You, Dracula.
Yeah. See, they should have had me writing these things, man. I'm not even a writer. Okay,
like I said, they seemed like they didn't really...
Like they didn't
care all that much about it. I think they were just kind of like... I don't think, too, even in the 1970s, even though the Hammer movies were successful, I don't think that they really didn't like understand the lasting impact that those movies would have, that people would still be talking about them 50 years later, you know, and everything. I think for them it was just kind of like we just kind of like need to make something that like makes us some money, and it's like, this is the way the trend is going, so let's make one like that. I don't really think they thought that much about it.
And they had Caroline Munro on there, who was the hottest chick in this movie, and they kill her early.
Yeah, she got killed. She was the first one that got killed.
Yeah, and that was just like, what the fuck are they doing? You know what I mean? That would have been great motive. All right, what would happen if the Caroline Munro character got turned as a vampire, and she was a vampire along with the Alucard guy through the whole thing, right? And in the end, Alucard gets killed because he tries to prevent Dracula from making that one his bride. So they're fighting over
her.
That would have been the fucking story I would have told. And he loses that fight. All right, and then Dracula gets her, you know, or he tries to get her away from Dracula, and a fight breaks out. That kind of thing, you know. But then they're all kind of killed, basically. That's how that story was. Or no, they're not killed. What if Dracula gets away at the end? Why does Dracula have to die at the end? You're going to resurrect him when you make the next movie
seriously.
anyway.
Well, I mean, they made another movie.
Just let him live.
Like a couple years later.
They kill
Satanic Rites of Dracula.
They talk about how bad Dracula is, and at the end of every one of those movies, Dracula dies like a bitch. Why don't you just let him get away so you can make another movie?
I kind of feel like he didn't die as much of like a bitch as he has in a couple of the other Hammer movies.
Yeah, they still die easy though.
But yeah, they do kind of get killed, sort of. I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I think Taste the Blood of Dracula had him dying like really like a bitch. So at least in this one, you think he dies like a bitch, but then like just getting stabbed by Van Helsing. But then he comes back out and he's like, surprise, motherfucker. So it was like that kind of thing. Yeah. And I will say,
he does die like a bitch, though. He falls into a hole that has spikes in it, and a little 90-pound Van Helsing fucking jumps on him to finish him off. You know.
Well, he pushes. No, he doesn't. He pushes him down on the spikes with a shovel.
Oh, with a shovel. That's right. I thought he cut his head off with the shovel.
No, he was pushing him down onto the spikes, like farther into spikes, so he couldn't get out.
Right.
But yeah, that's why.
Yeah, Peter Cushing weighs about 90 pounds. Okay, fucking soaking wet. That dude's all just skin and bones. All right, motherfucker. Wish I had those cheekbones, but you gotta weigh 90 pounds to have those cheekbones, and then have all your fucking back teeth pulled out. Probably. He probably didn't have any molars. You know.
I wonder. Man, Peter Cushing was so fucking cool. He was like one of the coolest looking dudes ever. Yeah. And like I said,
he got cooler the older he got. The fucking cooler he looked.
He just looked cooler. Yeah. Well, and the thing about Peter Cushing that's so awesome and why he's always so good, and he loved playing Van Helsing too. This was one of his favorite roles. Is that, like I said, he takes everything super, super seriously, and he has such gravitas that you just, like, buy whatever. It's like, it could be totally silly and serious and everything. And honestly, one of the things that I liked about this movie was, Peter Cushing, he's named Lorimer, isn't he? I don't know why they didn't call, like, the original Van Helsing, like, back in 1872, which I'll get into that in a minute, because the continuity's fucked up with that. But the original Van Helsing for back then, they said his name was Lawrence. I was like, what happened to Abraham? I thought his first name was Abraham. But I was I don't know. But the one in the modern day is named
Lorimer. They're making this
Lorimer.
shit up.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like they didn't even fucking check that. It's like, what was his name? Larry? Whatever. Yeah. I don't care. So it's just write it down.
Whatever the fuck his name is. Larry Van Helsing.
Skip Van Helsing. Or some shit like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, Bugs Van Helsing. Whatever. So it's just kind of like, I actually really liked the kind of relationship, like him and his granddaughter, because he gets involved too, because he realizes that it's his granddaughter's friend group that are being picked off one by one, and that she's involved somehow. And obviously Dracula wants her because I think he wants to turn her into a vampire specifically, like just as a kind of like fuck you to Van Helsing, you know what I mean? Because he's like, oh, you guys hate vampires so much, so I'm going to turn your beloved relative into one. Which, like I said, I think they did that in Taste the Blood of Dracula too. Now that I'm thinking about it. Which, like I said, was kind of the same story as this.
See, man, with these titles, I could just hear they would have inspired me to write some badass stories, and then they kind of come up with these kind of half-baked kind of stories. I mean,
yeah,
like the Satanic rites of Dracula. I'm imagining that. I'm already coming up with a story for that.
Yeah,
in my mind.
Even though that was the one that came after this one. Yeah, and it has some of the same characters. Like, it still has a satanic occult like thing to it, obviously.
Yeah, and you know, I'm guaranteeing you what I can come up with is gonna be better than what they come up with.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people like Satanic rites of Dracula
and
either.
Taste the Blood of Dracula, I think I can come up with some good shit. That's you going around making other people into vampires.
I mean, the titles are good.
Yeah.
Now, the one that was before this was Scars of Dracula, and that was 1970. And that came out in 1970. But the thing about it, though, is that at the very beginning of this movie, Dracula 80, 1972, there's like a fight that happens in 1872 between Dracula and Van Helsing, where like Van Helsing kills Dracula with the...
Still played by Peter Cushing.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Because everybody looks exactly like their great-grandparents.
Yeah, I look just like you. I look just like all 15 of them.
It's the same actor playing me like 100 years from now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he kills Dracula with like a carriage wheel, like a broken carriage wheel. And then, but see, the thing about it is that that's supposed to happen, that happened in 1872. It very clearly says 1872. But all the other Dracula movies that were set back in the Victorian Edwardian era, they very specifically said that happened in 1885. So so I'm like, so now you're saying that that Van Helsing killed Dracula like 15 years, like, or 14 or 16 years before they even met each other?
Yeah.
Like, it's right. So they did, like I said, they didn't even care about the continuity.
Yeah.
They just wanted it to be 1872 because they wanted it to be 100 years, like 1972. So that's why. So it didn't make any sense, like, with the older ones. But like I said, they didn't really care.
They're like, oh, the audience doesn't give a shit.
Whatever.
They're all smoking pot.
That's probably why. And like I said, they probably didn't have any concept that like 50 years later, like people were still going to be like watching them and talking about them.
They were like, it'll go by so fast on the screen, they'll forget it. It won't matter. They didn't realize it was before VHS.
Because there's even a scene in this movie. There's even a scene in this movie where Peter Cushing writes down the name Alucard, because that's Johnny's last name, and then like very meticulously has the right lines on it saying, oh my god, it's Dracula backwards. I'm like,
couldn't just write Dracula backwards.
Everybody figured that out already, like the first time you said it. So it's a way, it's like I said, I bought it because it was Peter Cushing and he just like took it very seriously, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's some good shit. But like he's supposed to be like a really smart dude, and it's like you wouldn't have to write it down, for heaven's sakes. You know what I mean? And then he says it to the cop, and the cop's like, oh, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, wow, you guys are really not that bright, are you? Yeah. Like, figure this out. Haven't you seen this movie? But yeah, I mean, this was kind of like... I think it's kind of like an important movie. It's not so much... It wasn't the first one, like I said, that put the vampire in the modern era, because Count Yorga came out before that. That wasn't Dracula. But this was among the first movies, I think, that put Dracula in the modern day. So... in a way, it's kind of... I mean, at least it was the first big, like, popular movie that did that.
It's not a bad movie. It's not. In the context of its time, it was probably it was okay. It's pretty good.
It got shit reviews, though, even at the time, like, contemporary.
Yeah, what'd they say?
A lot of people just said, you know, it's like the same kind of shit we're saying. It's like, you know, the hippies aren't that interesting. It's like, why, like, you have Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Why aren't you using them more? Like, put them in the movie more.
Right, yeah.
You know, have Dracula interact with the modern era if you're going to set it in the modern era.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so it's like even back then, like, it was similar kind of.
Aside from our complaints, it's not, it's a well-executed
It's watchable. It's still watchable.
It's got a good-looking cast. From this era, the British and European actors, they deliver on a lot of levels. One, they can act. Two, they're good looking. They have good fashion, even though it might be dated in this. The outfits are still kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's just like I said, they look more like something from the '60s, like from the Monkees.
Yeah, that's that's a lot of people complained about that too, because they just said this was, if this had come out in 1964,
it probably would have been better.
Then this would have been like very of the moment, but since it's 1972, not so much.
The only one that kind of looked like something that was the 70s and futuristic was Carolyn Monroe's dance outfit with the black goth outfit.
Yeah,
kind of,
because you could actually wear that nowadays,
and
you get away with it.
Especially if you had a good set of boots with it, with the buckles and shit, that would go well.
Yeah, you could totally wear that. No one would look at you.
It's more like a witch outfit.
Yeah. And witch outfits are timeless.
Yeah. Dance witch.
Carolyn Monroe, dance witch.
Yeah, because that's what she's doing. Yeah. And boy, and she's cute in this, and she just got cuter as it went. Fucking grew up. My babysitter taking me in California to the matinee and to see Sinbad. She was in the Sinbad movies, and Journey to the Center of the Earth. She was in that one.
Or At Earth's Core.
At Earth's Core. That's what it was called.
Yeah.
And
because Peter Cushing was in that too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So
I think this is a little bit later than this.
Yeah. So I'm old enough to have seen those in the theater when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
My Princess Leia would take me. My little babysitter Kimmy, she looked just like Princess Leia. I got photographs to prove it too. Man, I showed it on a prior show. She looked like a little what's her name?
Carrie Fisher.
Carrie Fisher. Looked like a 14-year-old Carrie Fisher. She's probably about 15. But yeah, just Carolyn Monroe. I didn't know what her name was, but I kept seeing her over and over again in those British movies.
Yeah.
And fucking everybody loved her. And she was on all those damn fan magazines like Fangoria and stuff. They'd have her in there. Remember?
Yeah, she was kind of like a little bit.
She was like a scream queen for a while.
A little bit. I mean, maybe more of the like minor ones.
Fantasy
but
type.
like, but she was in a bunch of like horror and sci-fi. And I think that this movie, like her being in this movie, was kind of like a stepping stone up to that, because this was one of the first big movies that she did, like in the horror genre. Because
I remember one of those Sinbad movies that I saw. I think she was in Eye of the Tiger. I think.
Yeah, we just watched them not too long ago, and she was in one of them.
Right.
Was she in the same one as Doctor Who?
Yeah.
I think she was in.
No.
Now I'm getting them all confused.
I'm getting confused.
Well, because we watched...
Tom Baker was in one, and he plays the Sultan.
That's what I'm saying.
He was in the one before that. It
was,
I think, called the Golden Voyage or the Seven Voyages of Sinbad. One of the two.
Yeah, we watched like a bunch of them in quick succession, so it's like the details of them kind of
and the
overlap.
Very first one I think was from another era. I don't think it was still Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah,
I think did the stop motion in all of them. But there was something about the first one that I think was kind of different than the other ones. It's been a long time since I've seen them. I actually want to get them all on Blu-ray. They'd be good to have. They're very watchable.
Yeah, they're super fun.
They were like as big as Star Wars was for me. It was before Star Wars came out, and when Star Wars came out, it blew the Sinbad movies out of the water. But in terms of fantasy and science and special effects, Sinbad movies are real good. Now, Star Wars came out, and that was a British movie too. A lot of people thought it was American, but that was made in England, most of it.
Well, yeah, they shot it in England.
Yeah.
And most of the crew was British as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of the actors were.
Yeah, and everybody in the Empire and everything, and flicking, Boba Fett and all that all came later, but, it was all British. Because the British could deliver, real good at making handcrafted stuff and professional unions and making sets, and, they were real good. A lot better than the kind of the half-ass shit Hollywood would try to do in terms of special effects. Best thing I ever saw come out of Hollywood from that era would have been like Logan's Run, or maybe like Silent Running. Remember with Bruce Dern?
I thought Silent Running. Oh no, I guess not. I was thinking of another movie.
That was pretty good for the time, but Star Wars blew all that shit out of the water.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I was gonna think too, since we're talking about special effects, Dracula 80 1972. Not a lot of blood in it.
No. Not
really.
No.
Other than, there's that one scene where, Caroline Monroe is like on the altar or whatever, and there's like, they dump blood all over her boobies.
Yeah.
But you don't really see a lot of...
They weren't bare, though, people. They weren't bare. She had her dress on.
But there's, the one scene, too, that kind of made me laugh at its, just its blatantness, was where you know, toward the end where Stephanie Beacham's character, you know, the granddaughter, where she gets taken by Dracula and she's like under Dracula's sway or whatever, and she's laying there on the thing, and then Peter Cushing comes in like he's gonna save her and whatnot, but she's like under a spell, and there's like a really funny shot where Peter Cushing is just like kind of behind her, like talking. It's like, I gotta go kill Dracula or whatever, and then her boobs are just like very prominent, like in front of his face.
Yeah.
And it's just like made me laugh.
Yeah.
Like with little nips sticking up and everything, and I'm just like, yep, boobalicious. It's a Hammer movie.
Yeah, it's looking at
I think there were even some publicity stills that came out that had Stephanie Beacham and Peter Cushing, and I think there was some of her with Christopher Lee too, where she was just like very obviously like down like that, and the dress was like just barely like kind of like the top of the areolas. It's like it was super funny.
Why don't you demonstrate, Jen? Demonstrate.
Well, I don't have as low cut a shirt on.
It's not. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, hers was just like it was
that's why
like
we're missing all those clicks. We had to get you back in those low cut tops, like in the beginning of the show. People, it's like it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Okay. Porn star level stuff, man. But,
all right. So, do you have anything else we need to say about Dracula 80 1972?
Yeah, don't discount it. If you haven't seen it, don't avoid it. Yeah, you can see it. You know,
yeah, I know it kind of gets derided, but it is still like pretty watchable.
It's watchable.
There's other stuff. There's stuff that I wish they would have done with it, and there's like, but it's pretty entertaining still.
I'd see some of the other ones first, but you know, what I mean, because if you haven't seen any of them, then I'd start from
the earlier ones are better. Like, if you're gonna watch the whole series, like start with Dracula from 1958.
Yeah.
And then kind of see but I think this is probably one of the worst ones, but they're all pretty good. They're all still worth watching. And like I said, it's got Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in it, and that's always a good time. Like, I don't even care what's going on in the rest of the movie. As long as those two guys are in it, then I'll watch it. So, So that'll do it for this movie retrospective. We'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.